The power play begins. The elevator doors opened on the 52nd floor of the Cole Tower in Manhattan. And Natalie Brooks stepped into a world designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the New York skyline like a kingdom spread before a throne. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and everything screamed wealth and power. Natalie adjusted her navy blue suit jacket and gripped her leather briefcase tighter. She had faced powerful men before, but Jackson Cole was in a league of his own, the receptionist. A young woman with perfect makeup and a rehearsed smile looked up from her desk. "Miss Brooks, Mr. Cole is expecting you. Please follow me." Natalie's heels clicked against the marble as she followed the receptionist down a hallway lined with expensive art. Her mind raced through the case files she had memorized over the past 3 months. 67 employees, mostly women and minorities, systematically pushed out of Cole Enterprises through unfair labor practices. Families struggling to make ends meet while Jackson Cole added another billion to his net worth. The receptionist opened double doors to reveal an office that belonged in a luxury magazine. Behind a massive glass desk sat Jackson Cole himself. At 38, he looked like he had stepped out of a fashion advertisement. His charcoal suit fit perfectly across his athletic frame. His dark hair was styled with casual precision, and his steel blue eyes assessed her with the confidence of someone who always got what he wanted. "A meeting of minds and wills, Miss Brooks," Jackson said, not bothering to stand. His voice was deep and commanding. "I have heard quite a bit about you." "I am sure you have." "Mr. Cole," Natalie replied, walking toward his desk without waiting for an invitation. "I hope your lawyers briefed you properly on the lawsuit you were facing." A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. He leaned back in his leather chair, studying her like a chess player, examining an interesting opponent. 67 disgruntled former employees making wild accusations. "My legal team tells me this case will collapse within weeks." Natalie set her briefcase on his desk with a firm thud. "Your legal team is underestimating both the evidence and my commitment to justice, Mr. Cole. These are not wild accusations. They are documented cases of discrimination, harassment, and illegal termination." Jackson stood up, walking around his desk to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The afternoon sun cast his silhouette against the cityscape. "Do you know how many employees I have across my companies, Miss Brooks?" "Over 12,000. Running an empire this size requires tough decisions." "Tough decisions should not include violating federal labor laws," Natalie countered, moving to stand beside him at the window, but keeping a professional distance. "Your company systematically targeted employees who asked for fair wages, reported safety violations, or requested reasonable accommodations. That is not business. That is abuse of power." Jackson turned to face her, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she was not backing down. "You are very passionate about this." "I am passionate about justice," Natalie said firmly. "These people trusted your company with their livelihoods. They worked hard, followed the rules, and you discarded them like they were nothing." The insult that sparked a fire. Jackson walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a checkbook. The gesture was so casual, so practiced, that Natalie realized he had done this before. He picked up an expensive pen and looked at her with those calculating blue eyes. "Let me save us both some time, Miss Brooks. You seem like an intelligent woman, practical. I respect that you are doing your job, but we both know how this works." He clicked the pen. "Everyone has a price. Every woman has a price. What is yours?" The words hung in the air like poison. Natalie felt heat rise to her face, not from embarrassment, but from righteous anger. She had faced sexism throughout her career, in law school, in courtrooms, in meetings with male colleagues, but never had someone been so blatantly, arrogantly offensive. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay composed. When she spoke, her voice was ice. "My price, Mr. Cole?" "Yes," Jackson said smoothly, completely missing the danger in her tone. "Name your figure. I am a reasonable man. I understand that everyone needs to make a living. You drop this lawsuit, I write you a check that sets you up for life, and we both walk away happy." The response that shook his world, Natalie stepped closer to his desk, her dark eyes blazing with intensity. My price, Mr. Cole, is something your money cannot buy. It is called integrity. It is called dignity. It is called standing up for people who cannot stand up for themselves. Jackson blinked, clearly not expecting this response. Most lawyers who came to his office ended up negotiating numbers. But Natalie Brooks was different. You think everyone can be bought? She continued, her voice gaining strength. You think because you have billions in the bank, you can insult me, insult my clients, and insult every principle of justice. But you are wrong. She picked up her briefcase and moved toward the door, then turned back to face him. I came here today as a courtesy, to give you a chance to settle this fairly before it becomes a media disaster. But instead, you showed me exactly who you are. A man so drunk on his own power that he has forgotten basic human decency. Jackson stood frozen, his checkbook still open on the desk. No one spoke to him this way. No one refused his money. Miss Brooks, I think you are being unreasonable. Unreasonable? Natalie laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me tell you what is unreasonable, Mr. Cole. A single mother losing her job because she reported sexual harassment. A veteran with PTSD being fired for requesting a quieter workspace. A cancer survivor terminated during his treatment. That is unreasonable. She walked back toward him, and Jackson found himself taking an involuntary step backward. This woman, who was at least 6 inches shorter than him, somehow made him feel small. The challenge accepted. You asked me what my price is, Natalie said, standing tall despite her modest height. My price is seeing justice served. My price is making sure those 67 families get the compensation and respect they deserve. My price is teaching men like you that people are not disposable commodities. Jackson stared at her, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. He had built his empire by being ruthless, by seeing every situation as a transaction. Every person as either an asset or a liability. But Natalie Brooks did not fit into any category he understood. We will see you in court, Mr. Cole, Natalie said, heading toward the door. And I suggest you hire better lawyers. The ones you have clearly did not prepare you for someone who cannot be bought. As she reached the door, Jackson found his voice. Miss Brooks. She paused, but did not turn around. Why do you do this? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. You could be making millions at a corporate firm. Why fight these battles? Natalie looked over her shoulder, and Jackson saw something in her eyes that hit him harder than any business loss ever had. Conviction. Pure, unshakable conviction. Because someone has to, she said simply. Because those families deserve someone who will fight for them, even against impossible odds. Against impossible odds like me. Jackson asked, a strange vulnerability creeping into his voice. Especially against impossible odds like you, Natalie replied. The bigger the bully, the harder they need to fall. With that, she walked out, leaving Jackson Cole standing alone in his penthouse office. The afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Uncertainty, the elevator doors closed behind Natalie, and she finally allowed herself to exhale. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had just turned down what was probably a 7-figure check and insulted one of the most powerful men in America. Rachel Foster, her paralegal and best friend, had been waiting in the lobby. She rushed over when she saw Natalie emerge. How did it go? Did he agree to settle? Natalie shook her head, a fierce smile crossing her face. Better, he showed his true colors. This case just got personal. As they walked out of the Cole Tower into the busy Manhattan streets, Natalie felt a sense of purpose burning in her chest. Jackson Cole thought he could buy his way out of accountability. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson back in his office. Jackson stood at the window, watching the tiny figures moving on the streets below. He picked up his phone and called Gregory Stone, his corporate lawyer.
Gregory, about the Brooks case, Jackson said slowly.
I think we underestimated our opponent, sir. Gregory sounded confused. Prepare for a real fight, Jackson said, still staring at the city. And Gregory, I want everything you can find on Natalie Brooks. everything. As the sun set over Manhattan, both Natalie and Jackson were thinking the same thing, though neither would admit it. This confrontation had changed something fundamental. The battle lines were drawn, but something unexpected had sparked between them. Respect, perhaps. Or something even more dangerous. The recognition that they had finally met their match. The courtroom arena 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan buzzed with activity. News vans lined the street outside, reporters jostling for position. The case of Rodriguez ETLV. Cole Enterprises had attracted national attention, becoming a symbol of the growing movement for workers' rights against corporate giants. Natalie arrived early, as always. She wore a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without arrogance. Her briefcase contained 3 months of meticulous research, witness statements, financial records, and evidence that would expose the systematic discrimination at Cole Enterprises. Rachel sat beside her at the plaintiff's table, organizing files with nervous energy. "They are here," Rachel whispered, nodding toward the courtroom entrance. Jackson. Cole walked in, flanked by Gregory Stone and 2 other attorneys from the prestigious law firm of Hamilton and Associates. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But what struck Natalie was his demeanor. Gone was the casual arrogance from their first meeting. He looked focused, serious, and when his eyes met hers across the courtroom, something electric passed between them. Judge Patricia Henderson entered, and everyone rose. At 62, Judge Henderson had a reputation for being fair but tough, with zero tolerance for corporate maneuvering or legal theatrics. Natalie had researched her extensively and knew she had ruled in favor of workers in 70% of her cases. "Be seated," Judge Henderson said, her voice carrying authority. "We are here for the preliminary hearing in Rodriguez et al. v. Cole Enterprises. Let us proceed with opening statements. Miss Brooks, you may begin." Truth takes the stand. Natalie stood, taking a moment to look at the gallery where 67 of her clients sat. Men and women who had taken time off from new jobs or unemployment to be here. Families who deserved justice. "Your Honor, this case is about power and the abuse of it," Natalie began, her voice clear and strong. "Cole Enterprises is a $12 billion empire built on real estate, luxury hotels, and commercial developments. But that empire was built on the backs of workers who were treated as disposable." She walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with each potential juror. "The defense will tell you that business decisions are complicated, that sometimes tough choices must be made, and they are right. But what they will not tell you is that these tough choices systematically targeted women who reported harassment, minorities who asked for equal pay, and disabled workers who requested basic accommodations." Natalie picked up a folder from her table. Maria Rodriguez worked in housekeeping at the Cole Manhattan Hotel for 8 years. Perfect attendance, glowing reviews, to Employee of the Month awards. When she reported that her supervisor was making unwanted advances, she was fired 3 weeks later for alleged performance issues. Those issues were never documented before her complaint. She pulled out another file. Thomas Chen was a construction site manager for Cole Development. When he reported safety violations that put workers at risk, he was terminated for supposed insubordination. The safety violations were real. 2 workers were injured on that site a month after he was fired. Jackson sat motionless, his jaw tight as Natalie methodically presented case after case. Gregory Stone scribbled notes frantically, but Jackson just watched her. There was something mesmerizing about the way she commanded the courtroom, the way she transformed legal arguments into human stories. "Your Honor." "Members of the jury," Natalie concluded, "this is not about business decisions. This is about a pattern of retaliation, discrimination, and illegal termination. The evidence will show that Cole Enterprises violated federal labor laws repeatedly and deliberately. We ask that you hold them accountable." The defense strikes back. Gregory Stone stood for the defense, his silver hair and expensive suit projecting corporate power. "Your Honor, what we have here is a case of sour grapes, dressed up as civil rights violations. Cole Enterprises employs over 12,000 people across 15 states. My client, Jackson Cole, has created thousands of jobs and contributed hundreds of millions to the economy. He walked toward the jury with practiced ease. Now, Miss Brooks presents a compelling narrative. She is an excellent storyteller. But stories are not evidence. The truth is that every single one of these terminations was done for legitimate business reasons, fully documented, and in compliance with the law. Gregory pulled up a chart on the projection screen. Look at these numbers. Cole Enterprises has one of the highest employee retention rates in the industry. Over 90% of their workers are satisfied with their employment. These 67 individuals represent less than 0.6% of their workforce. Natalie made notes, already preparing her cross-examination. But she could not help glancing at Jackson. He was not smiling or looking smug like most defendants she had faced. Instead, he looked troubled, as if hearing his own defense bothered him. The defense will prove, Gregory continued, that each termination was justified, that Cole Enterprises followed proper procedures, and that this lawsuit is nothing more than an attempt to extract a settlement from a successful company. Judge Henderson called for a 15-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, Natalie gathered her files, preparing for the next phase. She felt a presence beside her and looked up to find Jackson Cole standing there, his lawyers having stepped outside. An unexpected conversation, Miss Brooks, Jackson said quietly. Can we talk? Off the record. Natalie glanced at Rachel, who raised her eyebrows but nodded. 5 minutes, Natalie said, leading him to a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. Once inside, Jackson closed the door and leaned against it. Up close, Natalie could see the fatigue in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. This was not the arrogant billionaire from 3 weeks ago. Why are you really here? Natalie asked, crossing her arms. Your lawyers can handle this without you. Because you were right, Jackson said, the words seeming to cost him something. In my office, when you said I had forgotten basic human decency, you were right. Natalie was not expecting this. She studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or strategy. But what she saw looked genuine, raw, even. I spent the last 3 weeks reading every file, Jackson continued. Every termination, every complaint. I told myself I was preparing for trial, but really, I was looking for proof that you were wrong, that my company was clean. And what did you find? Natalie asked softly. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that made him seem more human. I found that I had built an empire while being blind to the cost. I found managers who covered up problems to meet quotas. I found HR departments that protected the company instead of the employees. I found exactly what you said I would find. And drop the lawsuit, Natalie said. Settle fairly. Make it right. I want to, Jackson said, and the vulnerability in his voice surprised her. But it is not that simple. I have a board of directors, shareholders, investors who would see that as weakness. They would vote me out and bring in someone who cares even less about workers' rights. Natalie shook her head. So you are trapped by your own system. Yes, Jackson admitted. But maybe there is another way. If you win this case, if you prove everything in open court, then I have the leverage to make real changes. The board cannot argue with a federal judgment. Seeing beyond the surface, Natalie studied him carefully. You are telling me you want me to defeat you. I am telling you that I want justice too, Jackson said. I just did not realize it until you walked into my office and refused to be bought. Do you know how rare that is? How many people have stood in that office and taken whatever I offered? That sounds lonely, Natalie said, surprising herself with the empathy in her voice. Jackson looked at her with those intense blue eyes. It is. I built walls made of money and power, thinking they would protect me. But all they did was isolate me from reality. From people like Maria Rodriguez and Thomas Chen, from the truth about my own company. Why are you telling me this? Natalie asked. I am still going to win this case and make you pay for what your company did. I know, Jackson said with a slight smile, and I am glad. Because someone needs to hold me accountable. Someone who cannot be bought or intimidated. Someone who actually believes in something bigger than profit margins. A knock on the door interrupted them. Rachel poked her head in. Natalie, Judge Henderson is reconvening in 2 minutes. Coming, Natalie replied. She turned back to Jackson. This does not change anything. In that courtroom, you are still the defendant, and I am still fighting for my clients. I would not want it any other way, Jackson said. But after this is over, win or lose, I want to talk to you again. Not as adversaries. As two people who might understand each other. Natalie felt her heart skip slightly. She pushed the feeling away. One battle at a time, Mr. Cole. As they walked back to the courtroom, Natalie felt confusion swirling in her mind. Jackson Cole was supposed to be the enemy, the arrogant billionaire who needed to be taken down. But the man she had just talked to seemed different, conflicted, human. The evidence. The afternoon session was brutal. Natalie called Maria Rodriguez to the stand. The 52-year-old woman spoke in accented English, describing 8 years of dedicated service followed by 3 weeks of hell after she reported harassment. He would corner me in the supply closet, Maria testified, tears streaming down her face. He would say things about my body. When I told him to stop, he laughed. When I reported it to HR, they said I was being too sensitive. 3 weeks later, I was fired. Gregory Stone cross-examined her aggressively, trying to poke holes in her timeline, her memory, her documentation. But Maria stood firm, and Natalie could see several jurors looking sympathetic. Jackson watched the testimony with a deepening frown. He leaned over to Gregory and whispered something. Gregory shook his head emphatically. Jackson whispered more urgently. The exchange was brief but clearly tense. Next came Thomas Chen, a 45-year-old engineer with 20 years of construction experience. He described the safety violations calmly and methodically, presenting photos he had taken before his termination. These support beams were not up to code, Thomas explained, pointing to the images. I reported it to my supervisor. He told me to mind my own business. I went over his head to the regional manager. 2 days later, I was fired for supposed insubordination that was never documented before. By the end of the day, Natalie had presented 5 witnesses, each with similar stories. The pattern was undeniable. Gregory Stone tried to counter with documentation and procedural defenses, but the human element was powerful. Judge Henderson adjourned for the day. As people filed out, Natalie saw Jackson sitting alone at the defense table while his lawyers packed up. He looked defeated, but not in the way she expected. He looked like a man confronting truths he had been avoiding, a shift in the wind outside the courthouse. Natalie spoke briefly to reporters, keeping her statements professional and focused on the facts. Rachel waited for her by their car. That went well, Rachel said as they drove back to their office in Brooklyn. Did you see some of those jurors? They were completely on our side, yes, Natalie agreed, but her mind was elsewhere. What is wrong? Rachel asked, knowing her friend too well. You should be celebrating. We are winning. Did you notice Jackson Cole during the testimony? Natalie asked. He looked devastated, like he was hearing these stories for the first time. Maybe he is a good actor, Rachel suggested. Maybe, Natalie said, but she did not sound convinced. Or maybe he genuinely did not know how bad things were in his own company. Rachel glanced at her. Natalie, please tell me you are not developing sympathy for the defendant? I am not, Natalie said quickly. I am just saying that people are complicated. He is still responsible for what happened, but perhaps he is not the monster I thought he was. That night, Natalie worked late in her small office, reviewing files for the next day's testimony. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for today, for giving those people a voice. They deserved to be heard. Natalie stared at the message for a long time before responding. They deserved more than to be heard. They deserved not to be hurt in the first place. The response came quickly. You are right. I am learning that everything I built came with costs I never calculated. Costs measured in human pain. Natalie found herself typing before she could stop herself. What are you going to do about it? Whatever it takes to make it right. Starting with letting you win. Natalie put her phone down, her heart racing. Jackson Cole was not behaving like any defendant she had ever faced. He was not fighting to protect his empire. He was fighting to understand what his empire had cost others, as the city lights twinkled outside her window. Natalie realized something frightening. She was starting to see Jackson Cole not as an opponent to defeat, but as a person capable of change, and that made everything infinitely more complicated. The verdict that changed everything. 2 weeks of testimony had transformed the courtroom into a theater of human drama. Each day brought new witnesses, new stories of pain and injustice. And each day, Natalie watched Jackson Cole's transformation. He stopped whispering to his lawyers. He stopped checking his phone. He simply sat and listened, bearing witness to the consequences of his corporate machine. On the final day, closing arguments echoed through the packed courtroom. Natalie stood before the jury one last time, her voice strong but filled with emotion. Members of the jury, you have heard testimony from brave men and women who risked everything to tell their truth. They did not ask to be heroes. They simply asked to be treated with dignity. Cole Enterprises failed them. The law is clear. The evidence is overwhelming. Now it is your turn to speak for those who were silenced. Gregory Stone delivered a technical defense, focused on procedures and documentation. But even he seemed to lack his usual conviction. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. In the case of Rodriguez et al. V. Cole Enterprises, we find for the plaintiffs on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Natalie's clients embraced each other, crying and laughing. Rachel hugged Natalie tightly. Judge Henderson awarded damages totaling $47 million. Plus mandatory policy reforms. Natalie looked across the courtroom. Jackson sat perfectly still, then slowly stood and nodded to her. It was not a nod of defeat. It was a nod of acknowledgement, of respect. The press conference that stunned the nation outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Natalie gave a brief statement thanking her clients for their courage. But then something unexpected happened. Jackson Cole stepped up to the microphones. I want to make a statement, he said, his voice carrying over the crowd's murmur. Today, justice was served. The verdict against my company was correct. I failed as a leader. I failed as a human being. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Corporate executives did not admit fault. They did not apologize publicly. But Jackson continued. For too long, I measured success only in profits and growth. I convinced myself that if the numbers looked good, everything was fine. But I was wrong. Behind every statistic was a person. Behind every termination was a family. I did not see them because I did not want to see them. He looked directly at the camera. Maria Rodriguez, Thomas Chen, and the 65 others who sued my company were right to do so. They were wronged. They were hurt. And they deserved better. Jackson paused, emotion evident in his voice. Effective immediately, I am implementing comprehensive reforms at Cole Enterprises. Every employee will receive a review of their treatment. Any manager found to have engaged in discrimination or harassment will be terminated. We are establishing an independent workers' advocacy board with real power to investigate complaints. Gregory Stone stood behind him, looking like he might have a heart attack. But Jackson was not done. I am also personally contributing $50 million. Beyond the court-mandated settlement to establish a workers' rights fund. This fund will provide legal representation to employees who face retaliation for reporting violations, not just at my company, but anywhere. The reporters shouted questions, but Jackson raised his hand. Finally, I want to thank Natalie Brooks. She did not have to take this case. She could have made more money doing easier work. But she fought for people who needed a champion. She taught me that true strength is not about power or money. It is about standing up for what is right, even when it costs you everything. With that, Jackson walked away, leaving the press in stunned silence, an invitation to change 3 days later. Natalie received a formal letter delivered by courier. Inside was an invitation to meet at a community center in the Bronx, along with a handwritten note. Natalie, I meant everything I said. But words are easy. Actions are harder. I need help making real change. Will you consider working with me? Not as my lawyer. As my conscience. Rachel read the note over Natalie's shoulder. Are you seriously considering this? I do not know, Natalie admitted. Part of me says it is a trap. Another part says, what if he is genuine? What if I could help create real change from the inside? Follow your heart, Rachel advised. It has not steered you wrong yet. The community center was a far cry from the Cole Tower penthouse. Peeling paint, worn furniture, but filled with people who genuinely cared about their neighborhood. Jackson sat in a metal folding chair, looking completely out of place in his business casual attire. When he saw Natalie enter, his face lit up with relief. "You came," he said, standing quickly. "I came to listen," Natalie replied cautiously. "Nothing more." Jackson nodded and gestured to the conference room, where a diverse group of people sat around a table. "I want to introduce you to my new advisory board. These are community leaders, labor organizers, and former employees. They are going to help me rebuild Cole Enterprises from the ground up, building something new over the next 2 hours." Natalie listened as Jackson outlined his reform plans. They were comprehensive, detailed, and shockingly progressive. Mandatory bias training for all management. Anonymous complaint systems with third-party investigations. Profit-sharing programs for hourly workers. Guaranteed paid family leave. "This will cost you millions," Natalie pointed out. "It will cost billions," Jackson corrected with a slight smile. "My board of directors tried to vote me out yesterday. Benjamin Hayes, my mentor since I was 23, stood up and told them that if they removed me, he would resign and take his investment fund with him. That fund represents 38% of our capital." "Why would he do that?" Natalie asked. "'Cause he said it was about time I remembered who my father was," Jackson replied quietly. "My dad was a construction worker before he saved enough to buy his first property. He built the company on relationships, not just returns. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that." Odd. Natalie felt something shift inside her. This was not the arrogant billionaire from that first meeting. This was someone genuinely trying to change. "I need someone to keep me honest," Jackson continued. "Someone who is not afraid to tell me when I am wrong. Someone who actually cares about the people affected by my decisions." "Why me?" Natalie asked. "You could hire any consultant." Jackson looked at her with those intense blue eyes. "Because you cannot be bought. Because you chose justice over money in my office. Because you see people, not profit margins. And because," he paused, vulnerability crossing his face, "because I trust you when business becomes personal over the following weeks." Natalie found herself drawn deeper into Jackson's reform efforts. She attended board meetings, reviewed policy proposals, and interviewed employees across all Cole properties. And she saw something remarkable. Jackson was actually listening, actually changing. One evening, after a particularly long meeting at the Cole Tower, Jackson suggested dinner. Not at an expensive restaurant, but at a small Italian place in Queens that his construction crews had recommended.
"Oh, this is nice," Natalie said.
Looking around at the family-run restaurant with red checkered tablecloths and photos covering the walls, "I have been exploring the city differently," Jackson admitted. "Seeing it through the eyes of the people who work for me. It is like I have been living in a bubble, and someone finally popped it." "That someone was you," Natalie said gently. "You chose to look. You chose to change." Jackson reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was simple but electric. "I chose because of you. Before you walked into my office, I thought I had everything figured out. You showed me I had nothing figured out at all." Natalie felt her heart race. This was dangerous territory. Professional lines were blurring into something personal. "Something real, Jackson," she said softly. "What are we doing?" "I do not know," he admitted. "All I know is that when I am with you, I want to be better. When you look at me, I do not see dollar signs or opportunities. I see someone who expects me to live up to principles I had forgotten I had." "This is complicated," Natalie whispered. "I sued you. I won $47 million against your company. Best money I ever lost. You think I care about the settlement? You gave me something worth more than money. You gave me purpose." The proposal that changed everything. 2 months after the verdict, Jackson called a press conference. Natalie stood in the back of the room, curious about what he would announce now. He had already implemented most of his promised reforms, earning cautious praise from labor groups. "Thank you for coming," Jackson began. "Today, I am announcing the creation of the Cole Foundation for Workers' Rights. This foundation will have an endowment of $2 billion dedicated to supporting fair labor practices nationwide. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, but Jackson was not done. The foundation will be led by someone who has dedicated her life to fighting for justice. Someone who taught me that real power comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. Natalie Brooks, would you please join me? Natalie's eyes widened. She had not known about this announcement. Rachel, standing beside her, gave her a gentle push forward. Natalie walked to the podium on shaking legs. Natalie, Jackson said, turning to face her directly, "You've changed my life. You changed my company. You changed how I see the world. I am asking you, in front of all these witnesses, to lead this foundation. To continue the work you have always done, but with resources that match your vision." Jackson, Natalie started, overwhelmed. "Wait," he said, pulling out a small box. The room collectively gasped. "I am also asking you something else. Something personal. I love you, Natalie Brooks. I love your passion, your integrity, your refusal to compromise your values. I want to build a life with you. A life dedicated to making real change. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Natalie's face. Every camera in the room was on them. This was crazy, impossible. They had gone from enemies to this in 4 months. But when she looked into Jackson's eyes, she saw something she had been searching for her whole life. A partner who shared her values. Someone who would fight beside her, not against her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." The room erupted in applause. Jackson slipped a ring on her finger, not a massive diamond, but a simple band with an inscription inside that read, "Justice, Love, Forever." Epilogue. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Cole Plaza Hotel hosted a celebration unlike any the building had ever seen. Not a corporate gala or investor dinner, but a party for every employee of Cole Enterprises. Housekeepers danced with executives. Construction workers shared tables with board members. Natalie stood beside Jackson, her husband of 2 weeks, watching the scene with joy. The Cole Foundation had already helped win 3 major labor rights cases across the country. Cole Enterprises had become a model for ethical business practices, featured in case studies at business schools. "Happy?" Jackson asked, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Incredibly," Natalie replied. "Though I never imagined my life would turn out like this." "Neither did I," Jackson admitted. "I thought success meant having the most money, the biggest buildings, the most power. But real success is this: people celebrating together. Employees who feel valued, making a difference that matters." Maria Rodriguez approached them, elegant in a new dress. She now worked as a trainer in the Cole Foundation, teaching other workers how to recognize and report violations. "Thank you," Maria said to both of them. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for changing." After she walked away, Natalie leaned into Jackson. "You know, when you first asked me what my price was, you were right about one thing." "What is that?" Jackson asked curiously. "Everyone does have a price. Mine just was not money. It was finding someone who valued the same things I did. Someone who would choose people over profit. Someone who would risk everything for love and justice." Jackson kissed her forehead. "I was an arrogant fool who thought money could solve everything. You taught me that the most valuable things cannot be bought. They have to be earned through integrity, compassion, and courage." As music played and laughter filled the ballroom, Natalie reflected on the journey. She had walked into that penthouse office expecting to face a villain. Instead, she had found someone capable of profound change. Someone who loved her not despite her principles, but because of them. The arrogant millionaire had tried to buy her silence with money. But she had done something far more powerful. She had taught him the meaning of pride, the real kind. Not pride in wealth or status, but pride in doing right by others. Pride in building something that mattered, and in the process they had built something neither expected. A love story born from confrontation and conflict. A partnership forged in the fires of justice. A future where they would fight together for a world everyone was treated with dignity and respect. Jackson raised his glass in a toast. To Natalie, who taught me that losing can be the greatest victory, who showed me that real power comes from empowering others, who proved that love conquers pride. To Jackson, Natalie added, who was brave enough to admit he was wrong, who chose change over comfort, who proved that people can become better versions of themselves. Their glasses clinked together, and as they kissed, the ballroom erupted in applause once more. Outside, the New York skyline glittered with possibility. Inside, a new chapter was beginning, not just for them, but for everyone whose lives they would touch. The story that began with an insult in a penthouse office had transformed into something beautiful. Justice had been served. Love had conquered pride. And to people who started as enemies, had become partners in creating a better world. Sometimes, the greatest victories come not from defeating your opponent, but from inspiring them to change. Sometimes the deepest love grows from the fiercest battles. And sometimes, just sometimes, one person's courage to stand up for what is right can transform not just a company or a court case, but a human heart. Natalie Brooks had walked into the coal tower to fight for 67 workers. She had left having changed an entire empire and found the love of her life. Not because she compromised her values, but because she refused to. That was her true price, and it was worth everything.